Okay, so the first thing I'll do is I'll copy over our working directory here. Just gonna specify that at some point before the major loop happens, right? This is where all the data is gonna get collected. So I just wanna specify where my file is gonna be stored and what it's gonna be called somewhere before that. I'm gonna say file name equals, and then here I'll just say, call it something that makes sense. Data so fun. And now I'm gonna create a parameter to make my separation of data easier. So remember I was talking about delimiters used to separate columns of data, and instead of kind of adding that delimiter to each piece of data, I'm going to show you another way that this can be a lot easier. So up here I'm going to create a variable to store our delimiter. So now instead of always typing in a semicolon, we can just use this and make sure that we always use that semicolon to separate out our data. Okay, and now I want to basically integrate the opening and writing of the file in this data collection, and it's super simple, and it's actually even easier. Instead of opening the file and closing it on separate lines, which we have to kind of pay attention to and make sure everything is open and closed correctly, there's another way to do this in Python, which actually ensures that the file is always closed when you're done with it. And this is a way of wrapping a piece of code within a file open statement. Okay, so I'll just show you how this works. We say with open, and here this open function is the same as we used here. So we just specify our file name and WB for write. And here we say as F. So what with does is it creates a block of code. So you see now we can tab over this entire thing. And now this whole structure is inset one time. So it's everything now that we're using to collect the code is within this with statement. And what it does is basically, while these things are happening, so while it's looping and then eventually it goes out, this file is going to be open and this file is going to be called F. And as soon as the code finishes and moves on to the next piece, this file will automatically close. So this with basically combines this open and close statement, and everything inside the with is here. So everything happens between the time when the file is open and the file is closed. And I love doing this because I never have to pay attention to closing the files. I can just wrap each chunk of what I'm doing relative to the file that I'm storing it in. Okay, so it's going to open this file called data.sofon, call it F. We can write to F as many times as we want, and when we're done, it's going to guarantee to close and save correctly. Okay, so once I have that specified, I want to do two things. The first thing you typically want to do is before you start gathering any data, you want to write a header line. You basically want to write a line of data at the very top of your data set, which says all the fields, the names of the fields that you're going to use so you don't get confused later. So I'm going to do one of these write statements. So this is F, this is the name of my file, write. Here I just want to put in a string with the names of my columns. So I could just do a simple string here and say, okay, name, and then semicolon or delimiter, and price. So those are the two variables I'm finding down here. A faster way to do this, in this case it's probably not faster, but when we start to generate variables with these things and we want to quickly combine them with a semicolon, is to use the join function in Python. So I'm going to show you down here how this works. Basically, if we have a piece of text we want like this, and we have stored as a parameter our delimiter, so this is a semicolon, we can use the join command to basically take a piece of text and use it as a delimiter between any array of other text. So for instance, we can say delimiter, so that's our semicolon, dot join, and into this function we can put an array of any strings or piece of text that we want to join with that semicolon. So for instance, here I can put name and price. You can see with these square brackets, I'm just creating an array from scratch. And now we get back the same exact string, name, semicolon, price. And we can use these because we have the delimiter specified here. It ensures that we're always separating out with a semicolon. And then here we can put in any array. We can make it manually, or if we have an array of data, it's a very quick way to create that string with a semicolon. It becomes really useful in the kind of data storage we want to do. Okay, so I'm just gonna put that in here so we start to get practice over making these kind of strings. So this is my first sort of title line, and it's gonna have the names of my data. And if I wanted to gather more data and make more columns with each for each entry, I can just add on names here in the array. Okay, so once we have the first line specified, all of our code is already gathering all the data. So all we want to do is at the time when each piece is gathered, so here the name and the price is gathered. So what I'm going to do is create a new variable called entry, and here I want to just compose basically the string or the piece of text which will be written to the file. And for entry, I'm going to use the same kind of structure here. Let's say delim.join. And here I just want to construct an array which has two pieces of information that I've gathered. So here name and price are my variables. I'm going to put those in here. That's going to create my string just like here. But actually one more thing I need to do is whenever I construct one of these strings, I have to manually create a return. Okay? If I don't tell it that I want to create a new line, it's just going to keep putting all this text on one line in my text file. So I have to manually create a return, and there's codes for all these things, like for tabs and for spaces and other things that don't have character value. There's codes in Python to do these. So if you want to insert a tab, it's \t. A return or a new line is \n. And I want to actually also add that up top here. So this will create my string, and then it will create a new line afterwards. Okay, so now entry is the line I want to store. So once I have that string, the last thing I want to do is actually write that string to the file, and we're going to use the same f.write function. I'm just going to put that entry into there. And just to test this, instead of going through the whole range, remember this is going to go through 55 pages, I just want to test it and make sure that everything is written to the file correctly. I am going to create a smaller loop. So I'm going to say for I in range 2, and let's just go through two pages, right? I can comment this out. So my full loop will be up here, and here I'm just going to put in a smaller range. Okay, so I'm going to run this. Okay, so we have a problem, right? It says this codec can't encode the characters. They're not in the range of 128. So this is a problem with encoding again. Remember, before we were able to read the text, the Chinese text from the site, we had to decode it. So we were actually taking that code, which is a bunch of numbers and letters, and decoding it into Chinese text. Now in Python, we're kind of representing the Chinese text itself. But before we can write it to a text file, we actually have to re-encode it so that those Chinese characters are converted back to the coding, because any text file can only store the very basic kind of numbers and letters. Anything like Chinese or Russian or Japanese or Arabic has to be encoded before it's written to a file. So this can get a little bit confusing. Just remember that when you get information from the internet, if it's anything other than Latin letters or numbers, you have to decode it. And then when you write to a file, if you're writing special characters, you have to re-encode it. In this case, it won't be scrambled, it'll just not work. If you try to write a character that isn't one of the standard letters, it will tell you that it can't write it. Okay, so all we have to do to fix this is actually just encode this text using the same kind of function. So here we had the text and then dot decode. Here we're going to take our text and do dot encode. And for the encoding, we're going to use a standard type of encoding called UTF-8. So UTF-8 is the same kind of thing as GBK. It's just another way to encode text, but this is a kind of universal worldwide standard that we can use. Okay, so now we'll run this. So just went through our data. It went through 2 pages of it. So there's page 1 and then page 2. We can now uncomment this. We'll get rid of this line and now actually go through each page in that whole range. So I'll just hit run here and let this go. So now it's finished, and if we go back to our data set, you can see now the file is much bigger. It has all this data. We can use Excel again to open that file. And now we have all this data. In a similar way, we can go through not just this one range, but actually automate going through the different ranges. So instead of just looping over this, we can have another loop outside of it, which changes these numbers, and small step by step with each small range goes through the whole set of listings in Shenzhen.